So we were told it wasn't okay, and then we were told it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine, and everything's
Yep.
fine. Okay.
You bet. Well, I appreciate your offer to come up and have a conversation with us, and hopefully we can share any concerns and talk through any issues that you guys have.
Tina, do you want to sit there? So we can have like a conversation about the deal.
And then I'm just curious, are you staying in the camp right now?
I am.
You are?
I've been there since the very beginning, so every night. I've been
How are
very,
you-
very connected.
How are
with
you
it.
doing?
Oh, I'm warm.
Well,
I'm definitely, I know how to camp.
all right.
True or doing?
Yeah, well, I'm from Michigan.
I'm from Michigan too, but now I have learned that it's coming on and stuff like that. You know, Dave Forrest, they rain on Hades out there.
Yeah.
So let it run for 36
someone
hours
sit here?
and then turn power on for them because that's good service.
Yeah, we're working on hunkering down for the winter in a way that's safe and warm for everybody who's going to be staying.
Well, what can we do for you folks?
Well, we just had a few questions. I think it's difficult to communicate when the media is doing the communication for people. So I think we wanted an opportunity as regular citizens to citizens, humans to humans, to just have a casual conversation about the concerns regarding the movement, regarding the occupation in general.
Okay.
And just have an opportunity to ask you some questions, as well as to have an opportunity for us to respond directly to you regarding some of the comments that have been released in the media and in your journal memo.
Okay, you bet. And then Commander Bob Day is our incident commander in charge of our police resources on a day-to-day operational level. And then Assistant Chief Larry O'Day is our assistant chief in charge of our operations branch, so he oversees all of the precinct patrol resources. And then Eric Hendricks is our assistant chief in charge of investigations, and Eric was the acting chief of police while I was out of town when this movement started. I was in Bangladesh. And so Eric was in charge of our initial police response. So I thought it'd be nice to have all of our leadership.
Thank you.
Did I meet any of you folks the day after the initial march? You know, there was about a dozen folks from Occupy up here in the conference room.
Oh, I
Were you in that group? Okay, good, yeah, thank you.
So I think one of the first things that we wanted to address is a concern over, one of the things that is mentioned is your concern that the march took on a different tone or nature, and I'm assuming, I could be wrong, but that you're interpreting that as an aggressive tone, based on the way the communication in the media release seems to be, and I think that we wanted an opportunity to maybe sort of address that and ask some
Sure.
questions, clarifying questions.
Okay.
Okay, so one thing is, I think that would be good to explain for those of us who have worked with Occupy Portland is to understand that social movements come in different phases, and that this is a very infantile stage of a social movement, so the movement itself, in regards to the people that are involved, are still in the process of developing their philosophy.
Can I interrupt just a minute,
Sure.
Gina? I just got a message that there's 2 more people. Do you have more people coming?
Not that we know of. Well, Teresa is from PR, but she should be the only one.
Okay, so downstairs, they said they want to know if they want us to send more people up.
Who
So we
are
need
they?
to be prepared. They didn't send his name, but I just didn't know if you want, we need to prepare our people so they
Yes,
can do that.
Can you ask who they are?
It's Teresa from PR.
Well, I called her, so.
Okay, so we were only
Is it a
speaking to
man?
one person.
I think we're good.
I don't know who the other person
We're
would be.
good to go.
All right, I'll get their names and then I'll ask you.
Okay.
Well, I'm curious, you folks are here. Who are you? Do you represent the leadership
Oh,
of the
sorry.
movement?
Yeah.
No, you said your names, but I mean, this has been, I think one of the things that we struggle with is who do we communicate with?
Yeah.
And so are you coming as representing the leadership, or?
Well, the awesome part
How
about
does
this
it work?
movement is that it is people-powered, it's personal initiative throughout every level of this movement, and some people have risen up in a way that's more like administrative, if you will, but not in a way where it says, I'm the leader, I'm the martyr for this cause. Personally, I've worked all day, every day in the information booth, but I don't consider myself a leader. I consider myself just one of the people who are working for this movement. We're working together for this movement. So, yes, I have all of the information, but not intentionally.
Oh, okay, so how did you end up here today and not another 200 people? I mean, how did you
Yeah.
folks, you took it upon yourself to come up and set an
Yeah.
opportunity to talk?
A little bit like a speech to this, if I may.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't have any shingles, I'm self-taught in all I know, so, you know, you just have to take it with a grain of salt, okay? I've been analyzing this occupation as a colony organism, because that's how it behaves. What you're seeing here is a populating colony, based on growing population, that's the definition of a colony. So whether it was a movement in the past, whether it was a protest in the past, whether there is still some protesting and moving going on, it's a growing colony, that's what's really true. And so there are logistic issues and those kinds of things that is what I want to talk about. Because as we see population growth, I'm trying to get them to get a census going, so we can get some kind of telegraph, okay, about what we're going to be looking at in the next week. The next week, if this continues, which it appears it will, if people continue to just come and populate, we're going to have issues, regardless of any of these political matters, right? With poop and trash and personal issues, and the population density, and all those kinds of things. So I'm hoping that we can get to the table about having some proactive ideas on how to alleviate that kind of pressure. Whatever the pressure is that's caused the Occupy to form, that didn't go away. And now as they have formed and continue to populate, there's going to be more pressure growing. So I'm looking to figure out how we can educate and how we can embrace these people. These are our most downtrodden, and they're the ones that have taken it in the shorts from all the other stuff, you know, that we haven't been paying attention to. So we want to nurture them and hold them in and give them warmth and all these kinds of things. And we've got folks fighting us on having, you know, big circus tents or something to house people. But how many of these little tents in ad hoc hodgepodge with trash all over the place do you want to see? And it gets worse and more clustery and messy. So we got organized and we really, you know, said, all right, this is what it's going to be. So let's, instead of trying to fight that, okay, how can we just address what's true? You know, it's like there was some, you know, the baby was born, but there's some mess, you know. Okay, so we got to clean that up, you know, and nurture baby here. You know, but we have a baby.
And I would like to just add to really direct respond to your specific question about leadership. So, because I feel like there is confusion on that, and that's part of one of the topics I wanted to talk about is a cultural understanding between a very traditional hierarchical system in the sense that, you know, the police department and society is very structured and you have top-down leadership. And so, and I think that for folks coming from that cultural background, have a really hard time and struggle with a movement or a process that's not hierarchical and quite in that way. And you guys look for like leaders in that sense, and it is hard to pinpoint because the idea is that we're a collective group of people and everyone has a set of skills and passion of interest in certain areas. So in regards to who to come talk to, it really just depends on what it is you want to talk about, right? So I'm on peace and safety, but I'm not the only person you can talk to at peace and safety. Okay, so if you want to talk about peace and safety issues and regarding the occupation or some of the actions, you can come to me, you can come to Nat, you can come to Eric. There's like a group of people you can come and talk to. If you want to talk to about sanitation, go to the sanitation folks, right? So we have like divisions of work and labor and interest. If you want to, if you have concerns about the occupation in general, the GA is the governing body, right? So there is no like president or leader in that sense. The GA is the governing body, and you can speak to the governing body as a collective whole, and they will respond back to you as a collective whole. So there are different ways to operate and communicate with the movement if you become familiar with how we communicate. But if you come looking for hierarchical leadership, you're not going to get a very good response from the community because they don't want to name anyone as a leader because there is no single person. The idea is that everyone to be treated equally and be valued for their skills that they have to offer in all the different ways that we offer them, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
This being said, those of us who are accepting duties and who communicate with each other, many of us have come to the conclusion that this thing does need some kind of a head, okay, because it needs to be able to act intelligently and wisely. It moves as a collective. If it doesn't do that, then you're going to have problems. You understand my mathematics, right? So in order to affect that, without creating some kind of chief, okay, or president or some such, we're implementing a decentralized operations coordinating and facilitating group, okay, so that you've got 7 or 9 individuals, men and women, who hopefully know how to pull all the electric apart and put it all back together. Who knows who has this information or that information? Who knows who you should talk to on this committee, that committee for that information, and so on and so forth. They glue the committees together. They just facilitate the committees and provide them with all the support that they need.
How will you select those 7 or 8 people?
They're
They present
self-selected.
themselves.
So-
Anyone could be on the committee,
So what if there's 30 people that want to be on the committee, they're all still on it?
that's correct.
I wish
So at this
there were
point, I've got between 7 and
You
9
wish you had 30 people helping with all the work, yeah.
Right now, I've got 7 to 9 people who want to be in this position I'm talking about, so that, for example, Josh knows how to fix the electricity, that I know how to also, and Sam does, so if Josh isn't available, and somebody needs help, they can get it. Similarly, with other committees, we could have a committee who's not, reporting to the GA necessarily, but they don't have to. If operations knows what's going on in the big picture, they can just report to the GA, your big picture.
Right.
But this is a whole bunch of men and women, not one person. So any one of them could grab a hold of the wheel if that was the moment that somebody needed to be holding it right there. But otherwise, anybody can switch into that spot and nobody's the guy.
Yeah.
There's no chief in that sense.
Okay.
Regarding conveying information from the city or the police force to us, we take that from in peace and safety or information and we distribute it to the concerned individuals who can enact these changes. So, to answer that
And-
original
Exactly.
question.
And there is also a PR group that's linked via email that talks, there's, I don't know, probably 30 people in it that talks a lot and kind of like, takes the input, what keeps an eye on what the press is saying and takes inquiries from the press. I mean, there's been, different people talking to the press, but that PR group kind of is like, it's connected a lot, just kind of, maybe that kind of, as far as speaking. So that group is all sort of in communication, Cobb that, keeps an eye on what the press is saying, keeps an eye on what the PPB, PIO is saying, keeps an eye on what you're saying, and kind of communicating out and just sort of like, okay. And I think that, out of that group, I think kind of grew this meeting that we're here.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
If
All
that
right.
answers
Yeah,
your
that
question.
helps, thank you.
And
Yeah, but I mean, it's not really intended to be a spokesperson for that, or, for the.
I mean, we have to be very careful about what we say and how we respond too, because the way the model of the movement is that everything goes through GA, right?
Mhm.
That there has to be a collective consensus. So our goal is to just speak on behalf of individuals, and I am empowered to speak on behalf of any working committee that I'm a part of if I've consensed with my committee, which I have. I mean, everything that's being talked about in the media and regarding the occupation has a direct connection with peace and safety, obviously. So we have a very vested interest in being a part of that conversation, which is why I'm here personally, is to be a part of that
And
conversation.
we still have Mr. Lackey and Ms. Bose downstairs. Do you want them up here or not? We have to
Who's that? I don't know.
obviously limit the amount of people just based on space, so that's,
I don't know who just like.
I think we're okay.
okay.
And then just, so for time, because I know that you are all very, very busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation, but I think one of the things that for peace and safety that we like to convey is one of the best ways to sort of communicate with us and everything first is to sort of have a cultural understanding a little bit about the movement. So I just want to make it clear that the organic nature of marches, I know in the realm of the department, it's very helpful for you all to have a route and know a lot of these things in advance, and I understand logistically and for safety reasons why you want that information. Right now, the GA does not have a standard policy in regards to how events are sort of endorsed by the movement. So actions sort of happen and sometimes they're spontaneous and they are organic, and I know that the department, I think, interprets the organic nature of those events as threatening or aggressive. And I think it's really important that we don't, just because something is organic in nature or not permitted in that sense, it doesn't inherently make it aggressive. And I think that's our concern, is that that's how it's being perceived.
I don't think so. I think we've actually responded in a very agile manner as a department to the organic nature, and really we're there to try and facilitate your free speech and your movement and try and keep you safe. And
Thank you for that.
people walking in downtown traffic during rush hour is inherently dangerous. And so we try and, I mean, from my perspective, we're really trying to facilitate and have tried to facilitate your ability to get your message out. We have to balance all of this with the competing interests that are at stake. So you have rights, other people have rights as well. The people that are working or shopping or using social services in downtown have a right to be able to come and go from our downtown area, and they're expecting the police to facilitate their movement and their rights as well. So somehow we balance all of that. It's not easy to do, So communication is really critically important with us so that we know as much as possible what your plan is so that we can facilitate it and balance these competing interests. With the march the other night, what concerned us in some measure is the fluid nature of it. So the fact that it seemed to be not just leaderless, but also without purpose. People just kind of went wherever they were going, and whoever was in front was leading it. And our bicycle and motorcycle officers then were in the precarious position of not knowing where you were headed, trying to get ahead of it so that they could block streets so that traffic didn't hit somebody marching. And we would have somebody seriously hurt, or a negative interaction between the motorist who's angry that they're being stopped for this march. And we've had past experience where people get out of their cars and there's tension and sometimes physical assaults and things of that nature. So our officers, as they're trying to leapfrog ahead of an event that we don't know where it's going, that puts them in jeopardy. They are, particularly in the weather that was existing the other night, on bicycle and motorcycle, the streets are pretty slick. So that concerned us. And then I think there were a group of people within that movement who seemed to be more about confronting the police rather than getting the message out. And we had one officer that was pushed into a moving bus. We had other officers that were threatened with sticks, and just the language that people were using.
So I'm sorry about that.
We were there to
But
facilitate.
you don't have to apologize for this entire.
I'm
Yeah,
talking-
this-
that was one
myself,
individual.
speaking for
Yeah,
myself,
we're
I'm
just,
sorry
so
about
those are kind of the things that concerned us about the event the other night.
Yeah.
So our expectation as we move forward is that if you, I respect the organic nature of your movement, and you have the right to be organic and to get your message out in that fashion. But if you are going to do unpermitted marches, you need to stay on the sidewalk and follow the other rules that all of us follow so that we can safely accommodate your movement, but also protect the rights of other people in the area that is being impacted.
So this is what my concern is very much, because as you have this growing occupation and occupations around the world, or when occupations, smaller occupations have pressure on them, they try to disperse them, that sort of stuff like that. You have converging behavior, occupy running, okay, occupants, lots of people, moving to a spot or moving together. But because it's a herd mentality at that point, they're moving, but a clear intention hasn't been established. That's when I see the greatest potential dangers, okay?
Mhm.
I think that the greatest potential for human beings is shared intention. But by the same token, the opposite, okay? When people move without clear intention are just the greatest risk to humankind also.
Well, and as you are expressing your rights, you have a responsibility to maintain
Yeah,
the safe.
accountability, personal accountability, yeah.
Well, you have a responsibility, a shared responsibility to maintain the safety and peace of everybody, including the folks that are being impacted and the police officers who are trying to facilitate your ability to get your message out. So you have a shared responsibility to maintain a safe and peaceful event.
What we don't have is a lot of grown-up behavior. I mean, you're talking about these downtrodden people, many of them may not even have made it through high school.
But other
So-
people were involved.
To lay on them the concept that collective authority means personal accountability is a pretty big picture idea.
Well, that's the type of dynamic
Right.
most
You
of us
guys
have
can
been
operate
dealing
like that,
with
and you understand these kinds of ideas.
social
But
disorder
teaching
for our
about
whole
this.
career, so you're sharing our world a little bit, and it's very hard to manage people's behavior who may be mentally ill
Right.
or abusing a substance.
Right.
If I could really quickly, just because we have an agenda of
Certainly.
certain things that we'd like to get through, and I would like a chance to respond to the march. As a peace and safety observer and keeper, I was at that event, and so I was just wondering, because I didn't, I was monitoring the event very closely, but it was, at one point, it was kind of long, and I fully acknowledge that I may not have seen everything, but I'm feeling pretty confident that I didn't see any officer get pushed into a bus, so I was just, I'm not saying that something didn't accidentally happen, or, I mean, I don't know what the scenario was, but there were many people, including several media including Coin 6 that I spoke to that was there monitoring very closely, who also didn't see it. And I was just curious, do you have video of this particular incident? And if so, are you willing to release this video at some point so we can see it? We'd like to.
Again, I don't know if we have video, but we have made an arrest, and that'll be adjudicated by the courts. And so I think is, in a very transparent manner, people can attend the trial and court processes, and if it goes to a jury, then of course a jury will review the facts and evidence and make a decision as to people's accountability.
So you don't have video?
I don't know if we have video or not.
Then my next question relating to that is, you sort of spoke to this already, but what specifically would you like to see the movement do, or those that are engaging in actions or facilitating those actions? Other than, I've heard you say permits and staying on the sidewalks and being mindful of traffic, because you have to facilitate the needs of other people in the community, so
Right.
I'm hearing all of that.
Mhm.
But are there other things specifically that you're interested in having in regards to our relationship when actions occur?
You know, that is a really good question. I appreciate your thought process in this, because we have dealt with a lot of movements in the past that are very organic and fluid. And so what has been helpful in the past is that people keep the peace within their own group. And sometimes identifying peacekeepers. So some groups will wear t-shirts, some will have armbands, but there are folks who have accepted the responsibility for monitoring the event and making sure that it is safe, and being the first if someone's getting out of hand or losing control. They're the first to come in and reestablish control and try and talk that person down. So, and then spreading those people out throughout the march. So if you've got 2 blocks of an event and you want to facilitate that in a safe manner, maybe you stagger your peace and safety folks throughout that event so that they're kind of being the bridge between the march itself and peace and safety. So identifying folks that are doing that and then having that responsibility to interdict people's behavior is very helpful. And again, even if it's an organic event and it is very spontaneous, we have police officers assigned to the park 24/7 to make sure it's a safe environment. Come up and tell the police that are there, hey, we're gonna march, this is where we're hoping to go, and this is how long we think it's gonna last. It can be a conversation that happens in 10 minutes before you leave, but that type of communication really helps Bob and his folks as they try and protect you as you march through downtown.
In being at the occupation the entire time and watching the different marches arise and march, sometimes they're big and sometimes they're small. Obviously, the other night, people were very passionate about what people were marching about, was this Marine who was critically hurt in Oakland. And in solidarity, that's why we were marching. There were over 100,000 people marching in Oakland. That was just Oakland about the event. So people were very passionate about this specifically. So it's like hard to say how many people will show up for a certain march. But I think that's a good suggestion. We will we'll find more people to be part of that peace and safety.
Yeah,
More
and Bob, any
mentally
other,
comfortable.
or Larry, any other suggestions from your experience with crowd management on things that help with that type of dynamic?
The communication is a big thing, so we know kind of which direction can get folks there to help with the traffic. The bridges are big concerns. The other night, the Hawthorne Bridge is one of the most dangerous bridges with the grading and the wet in particular.
Yeah.
For people on foot, for people on bikes. So any routes to avoid bridges are a lot safer for everybody involved.
And those are obviously funnel points for traffic and people trying to ingress and egress out of the downtown area. So we need to keep the bridges open. It just creates a lot of tension in the community when those are blocked. And again, the last thing we want is somebody to strike somebody with vehicles. So we have vehicle pedestrian accident. Those are horrific. So we want to do everything we can to avoid that.
A follow-up question would be in regards to, I just want to follow up with what I was saying in regards to estimating crowds. I know that that was a concern about like, tell us how many people are gonna be there. And I need, personally from a peace and safety perspective, I need you to know that we can't know that all the time. Because I mean, I'm not very technologically advanced, but between Facebook and Twitter and the way people are communicating nowadays, I mean, some of the events, like I did a poverty march, you know, we had maybe 50 people, right? And I mean, like, and we advertised it days in advance, and then like short notice marches, 500 people could show up. So, I mean, we could do our best, to try to like inform when we know, but we can't tell you what we don't know.
And absolutely, we don't expect you to say, hey, we're gonna have, 500 people or 1,000 people, but, that communication that Chief mentioned, I think that facilitation piece is really critical in terms of minimizing the impact that, the potential violent impact that could occur if we weren't there at all.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with, we're really kind of standing in between, because if it was just the protesters going down the street and the citizens that are trying to, we've seen in the past, we've seen people try to, run through, drive through protests and so forth, so it's, we're trying to mitigate both of those, and all we need is just that heads up, hey, we're gonna go from here to Pioneer Square, we're gonna go, that march the other night, I mean, when they got down to First and Main, the group splits, where are we gonna go? Well, let's go back to Occupy and do the General Assembly, no, let's go across the Hawthorne,
Yeah.
suddenly there's this division. So we're not asking, for specific you to pin it down on how many people, but at least an awareness of what the plan is, so that we can help kind of lay the groundwork ahead of time. That's
Yeah.
really what we're asking for. We understand that.
And then in regards to the number of peace and safety folks or folks that are gonna be involved in actions and helping facilitate that, our group particularly sometimes struggles with getting volunteers, but I mean, and I don't know that we're very knowledgeable in knowing how many folks to have in any given march in regards to numbers of people. So let's, I mean, on smaller groups, it's easier to figure out how many people to have there, but in really large events, it's a little bit trickier to know what is a good number of people to facilitate that. And do you have any knowledge or background in ideas in regards to how we would facilitate that?
In the past, when we've had very large marches like May Day and things like that, they usually have probably one for every 50 people or so, one peace and safety person for a large event. And I think we've worked really closely with like Jobs for Justice and some of the labor organizations around marches.
Working with us too.
And they would be a great resource to ask how to facilitate a safe event, because they've done it very well.
Actually,
Jobs with Justice?
there was a first meeting last night. The Occupy movement met with the bunch of the local labor organizations who are, AFSCME, SEIU, AFL-CIO, DCTU, city which represents an employees Tomatoes, and met with CAPIA, and who are supportive of one level or another with the movement, and met with them, and and those meetings are going to be weekly, where they're going to work with. A lot of it yesterday was kind of like sanitation, the honey buckets, and because they've been supporting that. But I know they're going to continue, so that's a good thing that could be brought up with that group too.
Yeah.
I don't know, we don't have a lot of time, so do you want to prioritize your
Yes,
list?
we only have like 2 more questions.
Okay.
Okay, the next question is, could you please explain what a Class C uniform is, specifically what we're expecting to see in regards to the gearing up of officers?
I can do better than that. Bob Day's wearing a Class C uniform.
Oh, Stazzy.
That's like pajamas.
Yeah, right.
It's, and so Robert's wearing it as well. Again, this event has gone on quite a while. And so our patrol resources, the folks that are the front line and dealing with public safety issues, are getting worn out. And we're expending a lot of resources, from the media. We've spent a lot of dollars on overtime to get officers to safely facilitate marches, as well as just keep the peace within the 2 parks. So we're wearing our patrol resources out. So what I've asked is that all of our police officers start wearing a uniform to work every day, because there's folks that work for Assistant Chief Hendricks who show up in suits. They're detectives, or they're assigned to other non-operational units, and now we expect them to come to work ready to go out and be on the street if we run out of patrol resources.
I, in interacting with the police force who has been present at the occupation the entire time, I'm grateful that we have such good open communication with the police force, because I talk to policemen or women every day when they come through, and it's been really, I believe, beneficial to have police officers there, and I personally appreciate having them there.
I'm glad you said that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
they like, and it harbors a personal, like, human connection to see the same officers every time. We have grown relationships, and that will help with the longevity of this movement and working with the police.
But just like many of the original organizers that we worked with have gone home because they're sick or tired or worn out,
Totally.
our police officers are feeling very much the same thing,
I
and so we've got to
believe
rotate different officers through. And that's why we sent the memo out, to kind of let folks know, bureau-wide, what our expectations are, and as we move forward, what we want them to do.
So, the last question that we have is in regards to our invested interest to de-escalating violence, and sometimes actions may happen where peace and safety, for example, aren't even informed of the action that's gonna happen, and we will have little to no time to prepare to engage or facilitate those actions. In those scenarios, we're concerned about a risk of violence, obviously, on both, on the activist part as well as the police force. And so we're wondering, and trying to articulate this question better, in those scenarios, we would like to have some idea on how we can mitigate conversation with you to work with us in de-escalating violence without the use of force. I felt personally, as a peace and safety person, when we were marching, I know you guys were very stressed out about the nature of what was happening with the march on Martin Luther King Boulevard as we were going there, but as you're driving along, like threatening people to utilize chemical weapons as a means to get people on the sidewalks is not a very, from the activist perspective, it's very fearful and threatening, and it actually makes people want to retaliate. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can collaborate in ways of communicating with activists in these moments, especially when they're more spontaneous and we have little resources on our end to facilitate with them, to have a say in how we're responding in a manner that will not increase the risk of violence happening.
Do you have a suggestion? I mean, what would work? Because what we found with that particular event is that people were moving into the street and Martin Luther King is a very busy street. And if we don't quickly move people out of it, they could get hit by a vehicle, or one of our officers gets struck by a vehicle coming down. So we were trying to get people up. Our mere presence and our words weren't working. So we were warning people, and it's a warning that we take seriously, that if you don't move out of the street, we may have to use force to get you back up onto the sidewalk where it's safe and appropriate for you to be. So I'm not sure what would work when we're trying. We started this low level of mere presence and just asking people, and at some point, we really have to get people to comply with the law. In certain situations, it's just not an option.
The police officers regularly come to the information booth and ask if there's going to be a march today. Sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. But then, I was told by a police officer that if there are at least 200 people, that they can block off the streets so that then people use the streets. Is there a cutoff point on how many? Because they
That's
said
up
if
to
you
the-
have 200 people, then you can march on the street.
That's up to the incident commander,
Right.
and I think 200 people is that's small enough to stay on the sidewalk.
Right.
But at a certain point, I mean, if you had 4,000 people show up, it's not reasonable for everybody to be on the sidewalk, and the incident commander can issue a permit. But again, what really concerns us is if we don't know where you're headed.
Yeah.
And
This is the herd moving mentality I'm concerned about.
But it's a shared responsibility
It
that we
is.
all have to maintain the peace and safety of an event. And if, with that herd mentality, if people are just going this direction and that direction, there's no clear purpose or outcome,
Right.
then it's really hard for us to protect people. you know,
Exactly.
Not just the event organizers and the folks there, but everybody, the police officers and the general public. So that's where we get into areas of really deep
Well,
concern.
I'd like to see some things get implemented on an ongoing basis to alleviate that sort of thing. And we're looking at having a processes and procedures analysis committee that can make recommendations about best practices. Again, the General Assembly agree with that, it's usually a community agreement and maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting back to kind of your original question there, one of the things that we've had a lot of success in the past during all the anti-war marches, there was a lot of passion, on how to help prevent there even being the negative interactions with the peacekeepers on the front end before the march. Encourage them not to be antagonistic toward the police. Our role is to help facilitate your message. And if, that march the other night, there was a lot of antagonism and aggressiveness towards the police that was causing these interactions to the point of even, the officer getting assaulted. But getting that best bang for your buck out of the peacekeepers on the front end before the march when you're gathering, just remind folks, we're there to help you facilitate your message and get that out. And, spread your message and let us help facilitate your march.
And what do we do about, as you said, this is an organic event, what do we do about the folks who are coming there not because they want to be part of the event, they want to cause a confrontation with the police? What do we do with the
So that's something that we want to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question. And from a peacekeeping perspective, one of the concerns that I think we have is that, especially when you guys are announcing we're going to use chemical weapons and we're going to use force, what's very threatening about that is that I feel like those statements are being directed at perhaps those few that are willing to jeopardize an entire action for something like that, where people such as myself and other activists that I know that have no intention of wanting to generate a situation of violence. So I think our concern is, and I don't know, I think that's the question that we have, is how do we mitigate that? Because I think it's very unfair to say that we want, coming in and saying we want to protect everyone and we're here to protect you, so we're going to use chemical weapons. It just sounds funny. If you say it out loud, it just doesn't sound like it's protecting anybody. So I think, I guess that was my original question, is how do we mitigate that, and how can we protect those that want to peacefully engage in an action, that don't get swooped into something that's happening with a select few that are wanting to do something else.
Again, that's that shared responsibility. When you're part of a group that's marching down the street, you have a shared responsibility for what occurs within that group.
But I think what you're talking about is people who are not accountable, okay? And so what I'm seeing is that you've got a number of people who have accepted some duties, okay? And you've got a number of people who are living in the community. They may not have accepted duty, but they live there. And you have some people who filter in and out, okay? So there's going to be a shift at some point as population density increases and people are, getting at each other and these kinds of things. So there's two things here. One, the people who are working and who have some real lives but stay there and that sort of stuff, up to a point, it's not going to be comfortable for the boppers, teeny boppers who want to just hang out and get loud and boisterous and stuff to do their thing in our community when we're working on working here. So what we need them to do is, if they want to go play, be loud and boisterous, we'll let them go down the street, okay? And then if they're too loud and boisterous, we folks can deal with them. We don't have to, right? And so this is a boundary issue, an accountability issue, a congruence issue, these kinds of things. Those are grown-up ideas that not everybody is ready to understand yet.
Right.
Okay, and so talking with the peacekeepers, our safety people, I've spoken with a number of the officers. I believe you and I have talked about this matter. So there's legal issues with you folks doing any kind of training or making any advice, to our safety folks.
Right.
All right. That said, it seems like it would be beneficial to take some kind of a proactive, stance here and see what we can do to train some of these people on best practices and procedures, okay, for the role that they're accepting. Whoever the source for that might be, I don't know. If it's not you folks, maybe you can at least make that recommendation. Which
We'll talk about it and see if there's some folks that we can.
Because 2 nights ago, we had 3 different events where somebody went to the hospital or, officers were involved, and we did a really good job, they said to us, but still, we could do it better one, I thought, and they thought so too, so we'd like to.
I think if we could, in the next few minutes, I just have some concerns about what's occurring in the camp.
Okay.
And I wanted to share my thoughts based on 22 years in law enforcement.
The movement is only 6 weeks old. We've been here for about 4 weeks, and in watching the general trend of this specific occupation, I believe that it's becoming more peaceful. It seems like a lot of the troublemakers have left, moved on. And just in last night, people are coming up and like patrolling themselves. Like when there's someone who's a troublemaker and they get to our occupation, last night there were like 7 or 10 people who were just like, get this guy out of here, like, he is not safe for this place. So people are starting to step up in that position to
Yeah.
self-regulate. But what are your concerns?
Yeah, welcome to our world. How
Yeah.
do you, so you have somebody who's causing problems and you have 6 or 7 people step up to deal with it. How do you deal with it? What if they say,
Yeah, what if
you know,
they start throwing punches?
yeah, what if, so those are things you gotta work through, and I don't have easy answers. I mean, policing is not
Well,
simple,
right
it's
now,
very complex.
I think right now where we are with that is, let us say in the hypothetical that we've got some actor and they're being disruptive, let's say they're interrupting running process, they're being dangerous, they're, throwing things at people or becoming physical. So in that moment, certainly the safety people want to control that person's body somehow, right? Hopefully benevolently deal with this, that's the idea. But what we've been empowered to do by the police, through explaining to us how to function in this way, we can hold you on the phone and say, hey, we've got a trespasser in here. Okay, we'd like you to run out.
Well, the park's open to everybody, so we don't have the ability to trespass people from the park right now.
park
So
service.
And just,
That's what we were
Yeah.
told.
oh, well, just a corrective, like,
it depends on the behavior.
Yeah.
So this would be you coming on scene at that point, oh, well, there's a problem, you've been called, and if you can witness this person's behavior, then you can take action.
we have a process currently, because I feel like this is a corrective statement that needs to be made. We have a process right now in regards to procedural protocol and how we deal with folks in the encampment and in regards to park exclusions, and we have that worked out with the Parks Department
Yeah.
and how that happens. So we do have protocol, and if you wanna know more about that,
Oh, sure.
we need to
Yeah.
talk after the meeting, yeah.
The whole thing with the trespassing stuff.
Yeah, we
that was
we
new.
can
Yeah.
talk about that, but you have concerns?
Yeah, just what we've seen is that the original movement was centered around some broad ideals, and many of the people that Eric dealt with originally with this are no longer part of that movement. And we've seen an influx of homeless
Yeah.
and some of our street youth, and I call them road warriors.
Yeah.
But
I heard about it.
based on what we've learned over years of dealing with that population and what our social service partners have said, who deal there with the homeless population, trying to get them into permanent housing or mental health care or drug treatment or whatever it may be, that when you get to a group, a large group, there's really the danger of some pretty negative interactions. And so there's violence associated with large camps, mental health issues. We've had to step in, Bob, I know, had to have officers come in and put mental health holds on people and take them to hospitals. So our concern is that how do we deal with this growing homeless population that in the past, when we've experienced large camps, and by large camps I mean 30 people or maybe even as small as 10, and now we've got 200 and many of them are homeless, and we know that in that dynamic that there's the potential for really terrible things to happen. Even our homeless social service partners tell us that's a bad scenario. We really advocate low impact camping, so for those folks, small groups, if they're on private property, permission to be there, picking up and taking care of their trash and not creating a neighborhood nuisance.
Well, this
So
is- this
how do
is-
we deal with this larger group? How are you dealing with this larger group?
Well, one of the things we continue to ask for is for the parks to be able to sanction or having large tents. This would clean up trash, this would deal with a lot of the pressure that's on these people in terms of cold and so on and so forth, environmental conditions, and then we could work with them a lot more. We were also talking about having some kind of intake situation going on, so as new people come filtering into camp, we can check in with them and kind of find out what sort of needs they may have, that sort of stuff.
So, and there's also, I want you to be aware that there's a working group called Transitions and Sustainability, and it emerged out of Peace and Safety to address the very concerns that you're bringing up. And the idea is to start examining the long-term sustainability of the overall movement, okay, the values and the philosophies, and how can those philosophies and values change in the way they physically look in the community versus an occupation, or what this looks like compared to what it could look like in the future. So right now, I just want you to know that these concerns, we don't have answers to those yet, because what we're trying to do is find out how we can make the changes effectively. But when you have 200 people there, getting them to just change without a conversation or dialogue is very difficult. So there's a survey that's being mass disseminated in the community right now to get immediate feedback regarding safety concerns and sanitation issues and all that stuff. And the goal is within, by Sunday, the survey is gonna close, and we're going to compile the data, and we have professors from universities that are helping with this to do this very quickly. And we're gonna disseminate the data in regards to what needs to be done, and then the goal is that this information is gonna go into an immediate proposal to the GA to request an immediate sustainable solution to the occupation. But we have to get GA buy-in in order to do this, and in order to get the GA buy-in on a change, an immediate change for safety and sustainability, we have to prove to them that the community wants it. So that's the purpose of the survey. So I'm just letting you know that this is an ongoing process, and the goal is to do it very quickly.
I would urge you to contact folks at Transition Projects and join. They're our social service partners that deal with the homeless situation in Portland. And they can share their ideas and thoughts on that as well. Again, going back to the point about large tents, and what we've experienced in the past is that when people are camped in large camps, whether they're in tents or just in tarps and sleeping bags, that large dynamic can be very volatile and people get hurt. And that's why we really advocate for low impact camping and smaller groups, because when you have the people with mental health issues and substance abuse, it's
Sexual
just very,
assault brings, if we have
Well,
big
it-
large tents, there's lots of other issues.
Yeah, okay, well, I hear that.
it's
So,
Janus Youth. Yeah, and with the younger folks, Janus Youth is a good resource as well.
Okay, Janice.
so I hear that, and I can certainly understand, that sort of thinking. So I'm still wondering what we can do in a longer view, say 2 weeks, a month, these kinds of things where if we still have growing population, this is continuing to happen. But we don't want to see this get denser and denser here, right?
Right. We have, the city has opened up the winter shelter, and so there's indoor shelter available, which is really more appropriate than outdoor
For those
shelter for the homeless.
I will not disagree with you there. What I keep saying is I'm just dealing with the facts on the ground.
Yeah.
Logistics are, they don't go to those homeless shelters, if they think they're full, or if they are full, and they show up at our place, right?
Right.
We just have to deal with that.
Well, the shelter's just opened, so I know there's space available.
Very cool,
That's good.
well, thank you for letting us know that. I'll
Yes.
spread that.
Bob?
The perception piece anyway that I have is that the emphasis of, the Occupy movement nationally, and then how it relates here, is kind of like you folks are sort of the exception to the norm in terms of your participation, both living in the park and also participating in the GA. Because clearly when we have some of our larger GAs, or like when Michael Moore was here, you had 1,000 people, or we had 5,000 or 6,000 on the original marches. We know we don't have those numbers in the park. So the perception piece I have anyway, with the growing increased violence, we had several fights overnight, disturbances and things on the fringe, or we're having assaults reported, but people are reporting assaults in other locations of the city and saying they were assaulted and occupied. Whether that's the case or not, we don't know, but the stabbing victim that was picked up the other day by the kitchen, whether he was stabbed there or stabbed somewhere else, but that association. So the perception piece is that you kind of have two competing interests. You have the message that's trying to be conveyed about the 99, the national movement, and the Occupy. And then you have this internal piece, boots on the ground, as you say, or facts on the ground, which is your homelessness, your drug affected, your street
Right.
youth,
Our
and that's
downtown.
your anarchists and so forth, and your violence. And I think that the challenge that you're facing, the same challenge we're facing, is how do we support both at the same time? And there is an opportunity to create, a separation or a distinction, and not have these kind of multiple competing messages. Then maybe there would be an opportunity to facilitate that. But your initial goal is being lost quite frankly, in the violence and in the police contacts and in that. So that's, you know what I'm saying? So, and there's a lot of resources the chief mentioned that want to help facilitate those people that are hurting and that are, you know what I mean?
And
So-
there's a lot present in Portland for, already set up for people who are homeless or need other,
Right.
support.
So I mean, it's almost like, you know, taking the voice of Occupy, and however that looks, and I understand the organic nature of it, and the desire of it, and so forth, and you could even have a piece of that be this effort at trying to care for those that have certainly been impacted by what's gone on. But somehow you need to create that separation from the violence, the disorder, you know, and so forth, because your message is being lost. And what I told the group early on is, you are gonna have, inevitably, you'll have some type of critical incident within the camp that'll be beyond your control, and that could be devastating.
Yes.
Not only personally to the people affected, but to the organization as a whole. If you have a homicide, or if you have an overdose, or you have something that
Or
occurs.
someone freezes to death or something.
Yeah, you know, you have somebody who's just not by anybody's intent, but is forgotten or lost in the shuffle, and then, you know, you have this critical incident, that's gonna really challenge any future effort on your
I
part,
really agree.
you know, so I mean, I'm just encouraging you to.
And the public health issues too, I mean, having people living in that small a geographic area, that many people, the conditions will be unsanitary.
Well, it's gonna get more intense, I mean, whatever, we have accumulation, that's what that's all
So,
about.
yeah, so these are the things I think you have to work through, and Bob really did a nice job articulating that, because you don't want your movement lost in the other areas. Yeah, I would hope you want to stay focused on the broader ideals and not get dragged into the other things that we
I
have
don't
to
think
deal with.
anybody
every day.
realized that we're gonna have developing an issue on the ground, you know.
Yeah.
I would just like to say real quick too, is that one of our concerns in regards to transitions and sustainability of moving the
Mhm.
movement to sort of what you're talking about, creating a distinction, which I personally feel is something that's worth discussing as a formal group in the movement. But our concern is, whether we want it, like it or not, or struggling with it, the fact of the matter is very vulnerable people have shown up. And there is a moral obligation to attend to some of the needs of these folks. And although I respect transition projects and join, I think it is fair to say that this city is beyond its capacity to actually handle the amount of poverty and downtrodden situations that we're seeing. And I guess a concern that I have from a peace and safety perspective is, I understand you have a growing concern of violence, and I know that you think of this as a pressure cooker, I know that. Our concern.
Don't you think of it as a pressure cooker?
I
Feels
think
like
that,
it sometimes.
I think that there are issues we need to address, but, and what I'm trying to say is, I'm just concerned that the brunt of, like, if you decide like, you're just gonna come in and shut it down, my concern is how that happens, and because the people who are going to be most affected by that are not going to be the white middle class who maybe initially started, the Occupy movement. The people that came to have their voice be heard and be empowered are the most vulnerable, and they're going to suffer. And I think what we're interested in doing is finding a way to collaboratively create this transition in a way that does not harm these people further.
And we absolutely get that. That's why I'm saying that if you folks are really fighting on two fronts. You're trying to establish this message, which I think, as polls would show nationally, 63% or whatever Americans kind of get it. Everybody's that 99, I think, kind of gets it. So you're trying to get that message out, but you're also trying to address issues that, of course, you're right, the vulnerable and the discarded and the neglected that have been impacted for years and years and years, of which there are a tremendous amount of efforts already being made. So you're really trying to do both. And you are correct that I think if there was an effort made to try and clear the park, the majority of people that we would contact would not be the 6,000 that marched on October 6th. The majority of the people we contact, if we cleared the park, would be the people that we contact already on a fairly regular basis in more individual areas that are now concentrated. So, we're not naive to that, and that's certainly not our intent. But the challenge being, once again, as the chief has articulated several times, our responsibility to public safety, our public health, and in support of the other bureaus that are trying to facilitate the operation of the city. So, the challenges for you folks is really, I think, greater than they are for us.
So
Because you have this effort, and it's on both sides of it.
on this track, so I understand that you cannot train us civilians, okay, that would put you in a place of liability. However, is it possible we could have some sort of a strategic openness, you know, sort of strategize about what would be best practices, once again, still trying to kind of touch on that a little bit and say, well, you know, maybe you could give advice like, after about this point in the evening, it might be a good idea for you guys to have somebody posted midway down the spokes of these pathways, or whatever advice you might give, right? Just say, hey, you know, because you've got these many people moving through here, we can't see all the way down, and you can't either. It might be good to have somebody down there in between to kind of, you know, that way they can do this and do this, you know, because manpower's an issue. So again, if you can give us some pointers on best practices like that without putting yourself in a position of liability.
We'll talk to the city attorney about it.
Okay, thank you.
Again, the other thing I really want to stress is we have great collaborative relationships with our social service partners.
Yeah.
These are folks who they've committed their entire lives and their careers to helping the downtrodden. So
Well, I
the
think
folks
we
that-
want to work with them, you know.
So the folks
bring
that
them in.
join in transition projects and Central City Concern, please reach out to them, Janice Youth. They are experts in this field of working with these folks, and they can help you, as you talk about this transition, they can help you figure out how to message it internally so that those folks who are homeless are actually in a safer environment and getting into appropriate shelter, or if they choose to camp, they're doing it in a manner that is much safer than a large encampment where you have public health and public safety issues. But we've got to wrap this up. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and the frank and honest discussion we had. Thank you very much.
Do we have a way to have a point of contact, or, I mean, in the future, if there's issues or concerns,
Yeah.
how are we to engage in the future?
Bob Day or his staff are
The best
point
thing
of
to do is,
contact.
the Central Precinct has 24/7 staffing at the front desk. So, and then I have a sergeant who's assigned